Welcome to Issues That Matter. I'm Cynthia Pooler. The topic for today is going to be 9/11, and I've got a distinguished panel with me. So I'll let them introduce themselves rather than myself doing it. So, Dennis, um, what do you do?
Well, I'm Dennis Speed, and I've been a writer for the magazine Executive Intelligence Review for about 25 years. It's founded by Lyndon LaRouche back in 1974. And in terms of the issue of 9/11, in the last maybe 6 years or so, I've had the pleasure of knowing Kirk, who you have with us, and he'll introduce himself, but he has a very close friend that he and I have worked with named William Binney. Mr. Binney was a prominent person at the National Security Agency, and Kirk will introduce himself. But just to say about my own role as a journalist, we've been in the New York City area since, I don't know, 40 years. I've been here,
Mhm.
so that day is vivid in the memory of all of us, and for those of us who were here, particularly vivid.
Kirk.
Yes, hi, Cynthia, and hello to the audience. My name is Kirk Wiebe. I worked for 32 years in the intelligence business for the National Security Agency, retiring from that agency in 2001 in absolute disgust a few weeks after 9/11 happened. I was at NSA on that Tuesday of 9/11, and I was evacuated from the building along with everyone else, as some thought one of the planes may have been targeting NSA. Fortunately, that did not happen. Sadly, many died that day, and I would tell you unnecessarily. Um, but that's basically my background. And since retirement about 21 years ago, I've remained active in various fora, including the LaRouche organization. I'm a big proponent of cleaning up our election systems and achieving integrity. So I assist True the Vote, who is not biased, not favoring one political party, but are very intent on exposing weaknesses and holes, many of them purposeful to enable cheating. So that's another important endeavor I'm involved in. But 9/11 was a key event in my entire life.
Diane.
Thanks. So I am currently an independent candidate for U.S. Senate in the state of New York, running against the Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. I am running as a LaRouche candidate. That will be my line, because in the state of New York, you can't be independent. I too worked with Lyndon LaRouche for about 33 years, and I was in Washington, D.C. when 9/11 occurred, actually on the outskirts of the city, handing out a statement written by Mr. LaRouche warning of a terrorist attack on the United States. So that day is very firmly in my mind. My husband was doing the same thing just 1 mile from the Pentagon, and literally felt the earth move when the Pentagon was struck. And I just want to thank you, Cynthia, for holding this, because as everyone here may know, they're about to shut down the 9/11 museum, supposedly due to lack of funds. I think due to wishing that it would go away, because it was clearly a major turning point for the worse in the United States.
So, I'd like all of you to kind of share your views a little bit about that day, what you were doing, and how that particular day affected you. So, Dennis.
Well, that day I was in our office. Actually, our office in that case was in Richfield Park, New Jersey, and the first plane hit. Several of us assumed, of course, that it was some sort of accident, though a rather disastrous one. And then I remember distinctly when the second plane hit. We did know that Lyndon LaRouche, who founded Executive Intelligence Review magazine, was on the radio at that exact moment with a man by the name of Jack Stockwell in Utah. We weren't listening to the broadcast, but we knew that he was in a position to make a commentary immediately about it all. So we had a certain confidence that we were going to have an orientation. I will say, by the way, that one of the very first things that Mr. LaRouche said, sometime literally 10 minutes after he was briefed on what had occurred, about 9:25 or so, he said, some idiot is going to try to blame this on Osama bin Laden. So this always sort of stuck in my mind as I watched, and many of us watched over the days afterwards. And I just like to say, as you go to Kirk, that Kirk got a real story about this, which really helps as to how this really and why this really happened, and some of the things that NSA tried to do. I'll let him go ahead and tell that story. But since that time, many of us have, of course, questioned what was said officially about it and have tried to get to the bottom of it as best we could.
So, Diane, why don't you go next and then Kirk?
All right. Well, as I said already, I was in Washington, D.C. getting out this statement. And I think, after that moment, many of us remember everyone was really on edge. I think there was a sort of PTSD, particularly in the New York and D.C. metropolitan areas, where anything that happened, you would jump out of your skin. In our case, someone smashed into our car as it was parked about 3 days after 9/11. And we heard this bang in the middle of the night, ran outside to see what happened, and discovered our car had been moved about 10 feet by a hit and run accident. But everything was on edge after that. And people remember then you had the shooter in the Beltway, shooting people at shopping malls not too long after that. We had the anthrax situation. And I would say that, well, we'll probably develop the shift in the United States, which occurred. And LaRouche issued a statement not long after that called "Shoot the Neighbor's Cat," where he said that the 24-hour brainwashing network led by CNN had pushed people into the state of mind of the man who, returning home to find his house had been robbed, takes out a shotgun and obliterates the neighbor's cat. And he said, if the wife says, "But Henry, it's just the neighbor's cat," the maddened fellow would have threatened her, "Don't get in my way or I might have to shoot you too." And LaRouche's point, and he said it explicitly, the United States was surprised by a mass murderous attack from rogue forces deployed from within the United States, since no foreign power has the ability to do to us what was done. This past Tuesday, he said there's some rogue element operating within our military security establishment, and if we rush off into wars against foreign adversaries, we are only going to make ourselves more vulnerable, and we are going to destroy the lives of millions of people here and abroad, particularly in poorer nations in Southwest Asia. That was his warning at the time.
Kirk?
Yeah, what a perfect segue from Diane and the example that she just, or the incident that she just cited with Lyndon LaRouche, saying if something happened, it was from inside the country, because I want to second that. Little did Lyndon know what he was saying, I'll tell you. So on that Tuesday of 9/11, I was like many people, watching television, the events in New York City. Ultimately, the Pentagon, Flight 93, of course, was way out in the fields of Pennsylvania, so it didn't quite get the attention that the other locales did because of the presence of media so close by. So we have these hits on the country. I clearly believed at that point it was some type of an attack from somebody, but I didn't know really who at the time. And I began to worry about other tall buildings. And I remember calling one of the radio stations in Baltimore, because I was on the Baltimore Beltway headed to NSA when the first and second planes hit. And I remember calling and saying, Sears Tower in Chicago, warn them. You know, one could calculate that someone's after tall buildings with airplanes. And there are airports around Chicago. So every building had to go on alert if you were a prominent fixture in our architecture in this country. So anyway, I get to work, I'm watching TV, we're trying to find out information. Of course, it's all internal. I'm not hearing anything from foreign sources. And so like everybody else, I got evacuated. We re-entered the building later and went home. And really my story begins after the dust settles. And that came in the person of Thomas Drake. Bill Binney and I and Ed Loomis walked out of NSA, resigned from that institution on Halloween Day 2001. That's not long after 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
We did it because, as Lyndon said, this would never happen if it weren't from the inside. And it's true. When you read the events, it's incredible. Yeah, absolutely incredible. Now, so let me go back to my story. 3 of us resigned. One close friend remained at NSA, and his name is Thomas Drake. Thomas Drake was the only one of the 4 whistleblowers who blew the whistle on NSA surveillance of Americans. He was the only one that they went after. Now, why? They wanted to set an example. They wanted to shut all future whistleblowers off. So the way you do that is what you do to Trump. You send FBI agents, you raid someone's home, you spend 7.5 hours like they did at my house, except they only sent 12 to my house. Trump got something like 29. I'm jealous. Anyway, so Tom Drake emerges as an important figure because unlike the 3 of us who resigned on Halloween Day, Tom was still at NSA on the inside. And he told me a story about an analyst that came up to him and in confidence said, Tom, we knew it was going to happen. An analytic organization, a small pocket of analysts, had the data about 9/11 before it happened, and they wouldn't let it out of the building. Now, who is they? There's only one person I know, or very few, and they're all at the top of the agency. But because he's the responsible person, I will name Michael V. Hayden, retired Air Force general today, and who's still out, and you'll hear about him once in a while in the news outlets. But he would not let the report go out to warn anyone. Now, I cannot tell you why Hayden would not let it go out. I do not know. I could make some guesses, and they might even be educated guesses. But let's just state some facts. The Bush family, President Bush was in the White House, had very strong ties to the Saudi government. Very strong, both personal and business, through the oil business. Aramco is the name of the firm. And a personal relationship with the king and various members of his royal family. Isn't it interesting that a number of outlets reported that while President Bush ordered the grounding of all aircraft in the United States, just subsequent to 9/11, a plane took off, I think, from the Washington, D.C. area, may have been Dulles, may have been the one downtown, But the point of it is, it supposedly carried some 40 Saudi Arabians out of the country. Now, isn't that interesting? So I leave that fact hanging out there because I don't know anything more about it other than that flight took place.
Okay, I've got a question for anyone who wants to answer it. What about Building 7? That was...
Well, yeah, let me say this. I have an open mind. But I will tell you, Building 7 has never figured prominently in my consideration about 9/11. I have heard some of the arguments. I think they're interesting. I do not take them lightly, but I have no way to say, yeah, that happened that way. Now, I will give one opposing view that I read by a couple of very learned engineers and geological experts in terms of explosions and the effect on bedrock. As you know, Manhattan sits on bedrock. It's monolithic, it's continuous, it's not full of fractures. It's very solid. It is a big rock that Manhattan sits on. Now, that's important to understand geologically, because when you have a large explosion on bedrock, and the explosion in this case is not the impact of the airplanes, it's the falling down of massive amounts of rock and stone and steel girders on the bedrock underneath. In other words, when the buildings came down. So one of these engineers described the impact of one building to be like a small nuclear bomb, the equivalent. And then to have a second one not far away also happen. We've got two equivalent nuclear weapons. And he simply says it's probable. He cannot prove it, but it's very likely that those impacts shook the foundation of a somewhat weakened building to the point where it eventually fell. Now,
Okay.
I cannot prove that. I'm just telling you what I have heard. Yeah. So,
Dennis or I'm sorry, Diane, do you want to add anything to that particular question that I asked?
Well, I would like to add something because I think what Kirk's approach was to that makes it very interesting to me. I think because you see the issues that people try to figure out if something was wrong because something that they think was wrong isn't explained. Whereas actually the first thing that you know is wrong is that planes are taken over all over the United States, which has the largest defense capability in human history, including particularly its air defenses. So that's the first thing that you have to ask. Why were no planes scrambled to stop any one of those planes at any point? So there, you see, for me, it's easier to take something which is completely irrefutably known and then ask a question about it. And when you can't get an answer to that, well, there's only certain conclusions you can draw, and there's certain people you can ask, okay, explain this to me. And in other words, we've got NORAD, we've had, we have Strategic Air Command, we can, we have Top Guns and all this. Nobody can get in the air or gets in the air that we're told about. No, we're not even told that a plane was scrambled that was then told to stand down. No way. It's an impossibility.
Diane?
I think the LaRouche's original premise about what was likely to be the result if we insisted on sticking to the lie, otherwise known in popular parlance today as narrative, which is a horrible word which should be eliminated from our vocabulary. that you would see a devastation of the world. And I would actually like to go back. I'm not an expert in brainwashing, but I know that part of brainwashing people involves fear, that you have to create conditions where people feel insecure. Because when you feel insecure, then you begin to doubt what's in your own mind, and you become susceptible to adopting new ideas that were not your own previously. And I think over the period, you could really start from the death of Franklin Roosevelt and Truman coming in, and the McCarthyite witch hunts, the FBI targeting of political leaders starting at that moment, the 2 nuclear bombs dropped on Japan. What reason except to induce fear would you have for dropping nuclear bombs on population centers when Japan was already in the process of surrendering? And then from there, look at the 60s, the assassination of a beloved president of the United States, and then perhaps worse, the cover-up, the Warren Commission, which everybody knew was a fraud because there was no explanation for how one bullet could have gone all of the places that it did. But what the fraud did was it increased the fear, because people said, how do you then address what happened? A great wrong has occurred, and our own government is participating in a cover-up. And I think you saw a terrible shrinking of the American identity in this period, where you had President Kennedy, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, who was likely to have become president. And LaRouche always said Martin Luther King, who was qualified to have been president of the United States. He had those qualities of leadership, all assassinated within a 5-year span of time. The Vietnam War, which we learned later, thanks to Daniel Ellsberg and others, was based on many lies. People became very small, and you had a terrible shrinking of the American identity, where people said, well, you know what, it's hopeless. You can't really change anything. All I can do is look out for myself. Ayn Rand, the virtue of selfishness. Think about it. Our nation, when we were founded, was a bulwark against the British Empire. And we were supposed to be a beacon of hope, a temple of liberty for the world, not because we were going to run around and overthrow governments, but because we had expressed a commitment of goodwill that every nation should get out of poverty. Isn't that what Kennedy was talking about? Isn't that what FDR was talking about? Every child had a right to clean drinking water and a decent education. And suddenly we shriveled up and became consumers. We had also the vilification of blue collar work and production. And what is the mentality of a consumer? What can you do for me? I'm going to sit here passively and you have to do things for me. And that's all I can think about. And, but that's not who human beings are. And so I don't want it to sound hopeless, but we have to be very aggressive is the wrong word perhaps, but stalwart and persistent in insisting on the truth in these things, because it's urgent right now for the world that the United States get its identity back.
How do you believe 9/11 has changed this country? Dennis?
Well, you had, of course, the Patriot Act. Then you had a series of other measures that happened after. You also had the wars that have occurred in the name of 9/11, or name of redressing the grievance of 9/11. And you've had, in addition to that, with the way in which the volunteer army worked, a separation, an alienation, really, of the military from the rest of the population. Matter of fact, what you actually have now is a circumstance in which it could be argued that the way in which presently to take the present administration's deployment of the military, on January 20th, with the 30,000 people in the street, with the discussions that go on about how the country is ultimately divided. We got half of the country is semi-fascist. And then you're giving a speech like that with two Marines behind you with this blood red background. The problem involved is the way the country has been changed is that there is a belief in force as the only means that the United States has to carry out foreign policy, when in fact, the United States has or used to have in the form of its leadership, people like John Quincy Adams, for example, the original people that created the United States, who insisted we don't go abroad to find monsters to kill. In fact, that seems to be all we are doing. So that is a major change, and much of it, by the way, under the Obama administration, which people were very excited about. But actually, the drone warfare, the war with the Libya attack, the Syria war, these things, at one point that we were fighting 7 wars under Obama at the same time.
Yeah.
So that change in which the destruction of the general welfare of the people of the United States comes about in the name of defending the people of the United States by carrying out these wars, these economically treacherous wars. And I think that can be reversed if you decide, okay, you know what, let's get out of this, just like we see in Ukraine right now. The Ukraine situation is a hopeless situation. The war is essentially already over there, but the money keeps flowing. And the people keep being told that, various things about it, whether it's inflation, whether it's, the problems of shortages. These are being blamed on circumstances that are not true. And I think what we can do about it is that matter of fact, some of us will be involved in something tomorrow around this, to try to call attention to the way in which these conflicts have allowed for journalists, for example, and other intellectuals to be suppressed, sidelined, and no real leadership seems to be present. I think the leadership can be there. I'm glad about, of course, what Diane's trying to do with her campaign. And I think the main thing is to tell people the truth, which is why I think that Kirk's remarks and Bill Binney and many of the others, telling the truth is the most important thing right now.
So do you think people have become more passive?
Are you asking?
I'm asking you.
I think what has happened is there's been an internal migration. And what I mean by that is that if you show leadership, people will respond. This is something that, look, you can see it from something like the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. Sure, everybody knew segregation was wrong, but who was going to do something about it? But then what are you going to do? Get out in the street aggressively with a rifle? And you weren't going to do that. So you had to show leadership, but leadership of such a nature that the whole country could respond to it, because it was nonviolent, but very clearly saying, we simply are saying that the Constitution of the United States is itself being violated to the degree that the rights of people in some part of the country and of certain, skin color and all, are that idea has to be reasserted for Americans. When you do that, you'll find that they aren't passive. No, people will come out, people will do things. People may feel that they feel trapped, but if you let them, that's why independent campaigns of all sorts are so important to them. So they feel like, you know what, I want to talk to my neighbors that oppose me, but I don't know what to say to them. I mean, how do we meet to discuss things? How do we deliberate? And so that, I think, is a very important element of the present circumstance, give the independence of thought back.
Kirk, same 2 questions.
Yeah, well, my biggest concern, and this builds upon what Diane so wonderfully described, beginning with Roosevelt and others, and then coming forward, is this thing, and it's evolving. And this thing used to be called information warfare, and then psychological operations. And the latest term, I have been schooled by somebody very steeped in the art of information warfare. It's now called cognitive warfare. And if you think of cognition as recognition by the human mind of things, or having a perception of things and what is happening, manipulating that perception has become everything. So we have all the undercurrents running that Diane and Dennis just addressed, but the new elephant, the new boogeyman, if you will, in the room is cognitive warfare. And to some degree, all are participating in it. Now, some people are in positions of power where they can use administrations, all the agencies subordinate to it. Am I talking about the current administration? Yes, I am. And when you have that kind of power, and you also have an NSA who is monitoring anything it wants to, in reality, you have a very optimal situation to shape the minds and ultimately the hearts of the American people. We are being exposed to more propaganda on a daily basis than X-rays emitting from the sun. Now, that's a bit of a bad metaphor, but I think you understand what I'm saying. I don't care where you turn. You have to be very selective in your information sources. And as Dennis said, the golden word, truth. But what is the truth? That is the dilemma many are struggling with. And we must create a network of human beings, whether it be the LaRouche organization, who I know values the truth at its very core, at its core. For without truth, you'll take any path. And that we must guard against.
Diane, same two questions.
Well, two things. I mean, one, since 9/11, for people who were born just before it or after it, they don't know a world where you don't have really bizarre searches at the airport, which have nothing to do with
Right.
anything. Don't stop really any. I mean, it's crazy. People think it's legitimate now to be spied on every moment, every second. They think it's okay. They don't see that there's anything wrong with that because our culture has become this. So the fact that your so-called smartphone records everything that you do, including your voice, and it's sold to McDonald's and Bloomingdale's and whatever, and you get pop-up ads if you're near your favorite pizza parlor, or and then you say a word and suddenly the next thing you know, you're getting ads for this, and all this data is collected by Google and Amazon and sold. People think this is normal. This is not normal. Okay, this is not how human beings should live. So that's one problem. On this truth question, I really think the question of classical music is extremely important to help people find their confidence and their ability to reason. And the reason I say that is because, particularly if you take music, which is not in the words and it's really not even in the notes, but there are certain universal principles of beauty where you can begin to build back a confidence in your own mind, also in acts of scientific discovery, where you develop a hypothesis and you construct an experiment, and then you can actually know whether your hypothesis was correct or not. I think we have to cling to the things where we can get validation, we can get confirmation of a certain process of our own thinking. And of course, that is very dangerous to the oligarchy. That's why Socrates was poisoned, because what else was he working on except developing for people confidence in their own ability to know the truth? And I have to say, unfortunately, they've really done a number on the arts because they want to bludgeon us into believing that things are beautiful, which aren't, like putting piles of cow manure in the middle of a museum and claiming that that's art, or banging on a piano and playing notes that mosquitoes show you if you stick a mosquito on a piece of paper. I will say that this is not art, but human beings know the difference. It's why do they say music is the universal language? Because there's something that resonates. You recognize a certain lawfulness, a certain ordering. You recognize when a great composer like Beethoven or Bach is stretching your ability to follow something. And I think it's really important for human beings to recognize these very beautiful qualities of what it means to be human, that this is part of the key to undoing the horrible brainwashing that we've been subjected to over these years.
Diane, first, final thoughts on 9/11.
Well, I think that everyone who had the impulse to never forget is right. We must not forget. We have not actually secured justice for what happened, and justice is not revenge. So those are my thoughts.
Kirk?
Yeah, and I'll follow on from Diane's thoughts. 9/11 is not over with. Those 3,000 who died must not have died in vain. No one, not one person, was held responsible for any aspect of what happened on 9/11. How can that possibly be? As Dennis pointed out, we have a highly advanced air defense system and ability to wage warfare in the air. And for that scenario to have succeeded, for that to have happened, we need to uncover every leaf, every stone, and get to the bottom of it. The 9/11 Commission was a scam. I know it. Tom Drake testified to it. You remember Tom Drake? I mentioned his name earlier, who was still at NSA after we left and was told of 9/11, but they wouldn't let them report it. I trust Tom Drake. I believe in Tom Drake's words. We must get to the bottom of what happened. Otherwise, those people will have died in vain. That cannot stand.
Dennis?
There was a picture taken that day of what's became known as the falling man. And it's a picture that a photographer took instinctively. And it shows a man upside down, headed toward the ground. We in America who have the ability to do things like this, have this discussion, talk to one another, and confront our government and our fellow citizens, have to think about it this way. Whatever we risk in doing what we do, we are not in the position of the falling man. That person had no choice. We have a choice. There's something very important about putting it that way, because we've all made the point here that the nation changed radically after 9/11, and it was not for the better. But then we have to ask another question. Is there a way for us as a nation to have a discussion about this fact, which may in fact cause us to confront something in the country that may be as lethal as what happened that day? Do we take that path and make that choice? Now I say, well, considering that That falling man was not a political operative, may have been not pro or anti-Islamic or anything else, but was forced into making that choice in that way. And he was related to me because he was a citizen of the United States, or he was in the United States when it happened. He was a victim of something that shouldn't have occurred. And in the name of him and the 3,000 others and the people in the Pentagon and the people in Pennsylvania, we have a moral obligation to have that discussion. And I'm glad you're helping that discussion happen with this show.
Thank you so much. I'm sure that we will talk about other important issues as we go along. So you've been listening to Diane Sayre, Dennis Speed, and Kirk Whip. I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
Um, this is Issues That Matter, and if you like this show, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's been a pleasure talking with all of you. Hope we talk again. Thank you, and thank you everybody for listening and watching. Have a wonderful day.